Now, my first guest has spent the last few years in space as Captain Kirk, in charge of the Starship Enterprise. In fact, you've seen him earlier this evening on this channel, still adventuring in outer space. The television series Star Trek started its career in 1966. They scrapped the series in '69 after making 79 episodes. Since then, the demand for reruns has grown and grown until today the repeats are shown in more than 100 countries throughout the world. The program's become an institution, supported by legions of fans who call themselves Trekkies. They, in particular, will be over the moon, if they'll pardon the expression, by the news that a multi-million-dollar movie based on the Star Trek series is released this week. All the favourites will be there, including my first guest tonight, once described as looking like a quarterback with a huge heart pumping the milk of human kindness around his wholesome body. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Kirk, alias William Shatner.
I've never heard that description.
That was a man called Alan Corran who writes about television for the Times, the London Times. And in fact, he's a fan. You'll be delighted to know.
But that's hysterical because I knew that I had gotten old one day when I realized that I could no longer try out for the Los Angeles Rams football team as a quarterback. That was our football. And that's really funny. I'd never heard that statement before.
Let's talk a little bit about this movie because it's had remarkable success already. It's taken something like $3 or $4 million already in New York.
Oh, no, that's 2 days old.
2 days old.
It is, at this moment as we speak, it is outgrossed any movie in the history of cinema. It is, at this point, the largest grossing movie in cinema history.
Why?
I'd like to think that, that there's something magical about its appeal, other than just to the people who love the series. I think there is something about Star Trek that I don't know what it is, that is universal and is calling the people to come and see it. It's the picture to see this year.
Can I just put a point to you that Time magazine made about it, about
Please.
its appeal, about the appeal generally of Star Trek and the movie, which is quite extraordinary. It said, on TV, Star Trek was the final flare-up of the John F. Kennedy era. The crew of the Starship Enterprise formed a cosmic Camelot, carrying a benevolent imperialism into the last new frontier, outer space.
Sounds British, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? As played by William Shatner, Captain James Kirk had the looks and self-assurance of John Kennedy, and even the name of Mr. Spock echoed that of Dr. Spock, another hero of the pre-Watergate liberal consensus. In part, the idolizing of Star Trek may be a nostalgia for the image of the self-confident, generous, but ready to fight America. Now, if you understand that, do you agree with this?
I do understand it, and I think there's a great deal of truth in it, yeah.
How much is it due also, do you think, its popularity universally, to the innocence of the characters on board? Because, I mean, there's no sex in it, is there? There's no...
Well, I don't know whether I would agree with that.
Not in the episodes I've seen.
You haven't seen them all. There was one.
There was one.
No, I think that there was a great deal of sex insinuated, perhaps.
Yes.
No lascivious kissing was allowed on the spaceship due to the fact that would warp our thinking, let alone our speed. I think that there was an ingenuousness, perhaps, in the characters, in that they dealt with evil in a clear-cut fashion. Perhaps that's one of the appeals, as Time magazine says. I would agree that there was an ingenuousness to the appeal, but perhaps that's also sophistication.
Of course, it's amazing. I mean, it was once estimated that, in spite of this sort of lack of overt sex appeal there was there, that 80% of the Star Trek fans, and there are millions of them, in fact, were women, and that the majority of them lusted after you and Dr. Spock.
Yeah, that's terrible.
It's an awful thing to live with, isn't it? It really is. I wonder what they saw in it, though. I mean, what's...
May I say, Michael, for all your audience, I'm glad you do wonder.
Was it a surprise for you? Because as I said in the introduction, this had an extraordinary career. It was made way back in the 60s. It was taken off after 3 years. And then it comes back again this late in time,
Yes.
10 years later.
Yeah.
Did it amaze you that they ever thought of doing a movie about it?
Well, after it was canceled on American network television in 1970, for about 6 or 7 years, it was re-released in various independent stations. In America, we call it syndication.
Right.
And it played at an earlier hour and became increasingly more popular during the 6 or 7 years from till about 1976, 77. At that point, it was incredibly popular. It was, at that time slot, it was beating the competition that was coming over, new programs coming over the network. At that point, I began to hear rumblings of the potential of making a movie. And Paramount Studios was thinking about making it in smaller terms, perhaps a small movie, perhaps a movie for television, or even perhaps another series. At one point, they came to me and asked me if I would like to be in it. I said, show me a script. They said, we don't have a script because we don't know whether we can get the cast or not. So I faced that catch-22 situation. And finally, I decided if they're going to do Star Trek, and I loved doing the series as much as I did, and it was a wonderful part for an actor, I couldn't see somebody else being a Captain Kirk other than me. So I said, yes, I'll be in it if you do it, at which point it began to take shape. And it was only after the release of Star Wars and its huge grosses, the huge amount of money it made for 20th Century Fox, that I think that Paramount believed that they could do something.
When you get, by the way, these repeats shown throughout the world, you get residuals on them. Do you get paid for every episode?
No.
You don't?
No, as a matter of fact...
Because we calculated that there's been 50,000 showings, something like that, throughout the world. I mean, that would have made you a bob or two, wouldn't it, if you'd have been on the residual?
Yes, a bob or two, that's true. Or even a buck or two.
Yeah, a buck or two, right.
No, as a matter of fact, at that time, the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, the rulings then were 5 showings, and there was no need to pay any more residuals. So the first 5 showings, I guess, were in the first month of its re-release. Right. So in effect, our faces have been before the public of the world, and what we sell, our face, was not compensated for.
I think that's awful. We shouldn't have a silver collection for you.
Yes, I was going to pass the hat myself.
The fans that you've accumulated around the world are a very specific group of people. They're called Trekkies, aren't they?
Well, they have recently, I found out, they wish to be known as Trekkers.
Trekkers, why is that?
I haven't the faintest.
Well, is it possible to define them, or do they come from every kind of walk of life?
Well, I think they come from every walk of life, and some running for life, I think. But I guess they're united by their enthusiasm for Star Trek, and that is the unifying concept. You know, there's a story I'd like to tell you that I know you're not prepared for.
That makes a change.
But it does have to do with Trekkies or Trekkers. It doesn't really matter what they're called. They like Star Trek. And I was terribly moved when I heard the story, and I would love to tell it to you. I was being driven someplace to the studio, I think, and the driver turned to me and he said, I asked to get on this assignment because I wanted to meet you. Something happened to me during the Vietnam War, and I wanted to tell you. Now, I was told you would laugh at what I'm going to say, but I wanted to tell you anyway. He said that he had been a soldier in the Special Forces during the Vietnam War and was captured after 6 months of service and was put in jail in their ovens. And he said to me that the things you might have seen in Deer Hunter and in Apocalypse Now, it doesn't come anywhere close to the kinds of things that my 10 fellow inmates were subjected to. Water up to the neck for a week, bound hand and foot in a fetal position for a week, and then the worst thing was to be unbound and the blood rushing to those muscles, the incredible pain. Is that we were driven to the point of insanity, and we were close to losing our lives, and there were so many of us that had nothing in common. We came from different states of the Union, different socioeconomic brackets. We had nothing in common except the one thing that we all found that we loved, which was Star Trek. And it sounds funny, but the story itself is not. He said the only way we kept ourselves alive was to play what became known to them as the Star Trek game. The Viet Cong were known as the Klingons. And each soldier would assume another role, Captain Kirk or Mr. Spock or Bones, whatever. And they strived to remember each episode because they were so immersed in Star Trek, these young men, that they could remember episodes dialogue for dialogue, word for word. And they played this game day after day, week after week, and preserved their sanity, and in some cases saved their lives, although some were lost, by playing the Star Trek game. I heard that story and I was so moved. And I realized that as much fun as we have with Trekkies or Trekkers, and I don't disparage anybody's enthusiasm for the show. I lead the enthusiasm, of course, but I couldn't believe that anything as meaningful could happen to an actor in a role as that story that
Yeah,
happened to.
quite extraordinary. Do people, though, do the Trekkers, the Trekkies, in the extreme cases, do they actually, because you do go along to conferences, conventions, don't you?
I've gone to about a half a dozen.
Yes. Do they actually believe that you are Captain Kirk?
No, I don't think that they've reached that point of insanity. You talk about being an institution. You want to be an institution, right. Get into an institution. No. They don't think I'm Captain Kirk. I think I'm Captain Kirk.
That's all right.
One time, I was on a go-kart place. You have go-karts here?
Yes, right.
And going around in a go-kart with my 3 kids, and I was riding the herd on them. I was protecting my 3 kids because, in addition to the 3 of us on the track, were a number of young wild kids that hopped up on something, and they were whizzing around. And we were going slowly, so I was riding the patriarchal herd. And as we came towards the end of our ride, one of the kids smashed into me as I was in back, just behind my child, and cut my finger, and I was angry, the outraged father. And this was a kid about 19 or 20. He was a violent young man, but I was even more violent. I picked him up and I raced him and I threw him to the ground. I was insane with anger. And I turned around and there was 3 other kids coming at me, 3 young, hard-muscled men coming at me. And on the show, I had devised techniques to hit stuntmen. And you can hit a stuntman at great, you can be a foot away from them. As long as they move their head at the right moment, you don't come anywhere near them. Well, I had devised this technique of leaping up into the air and kicking a guy in the chest with both feet. And the stuntman would then reel back, hit a wall, and fall to his, sit down, because it was obviously Captain Kirk's blow was overwhelming. Whereas, in fact, it wasn't so. And now these 3 guys were coming at me. And in that instant, I thought, hey, wait a minute, 3 guys, I can take that. I can deal with this guy. What I'll do is I'll leap into the air, and I'll hit that guy with both feet. And in that same instant, I realized Newton's law, reaction and opposite reaction. If I hit him with both feet, I'd fall to the ground. And they'd stomp me to death. I began to talk very quickly and talked my way out of any trouble, bleeding to death at the same time.
But generally, you've enjoyed being Captain Kirk.
Well, I haven't really been Captain Kirk. I was, for 3 years, I played the part of Captain Kirk. In 1970, it was canceled, and in 1979, this movie opportunity comes up, which I took. The intervening years was filled, as actors' years are filled, with many ventures, some of which were notable, some of which were not notable. But I wasn't Captain Kirk for 9 years. I am now, in this period of time, your average Captain Kirk, but...
Well, without getting the residuals, you needed to work for the intervening 9 years. Bill Shatner, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.